Violence is never the answer. Well, that makes you a hypocrite then, because you still support and celebrate violence. The only thing that you're missing, either intentionally or unintentionally, is whose violence you support and whose violence you condemn. It is a common feature among reactionaries to always dismiss and disregard the violence meted out by security forces of an all-powerful imperial state, and always condemn the violence committed in retaliation against the stability of the status quo. You don't actually condemn violence, you just don't want to be uncomfortable.
That's a TikTok creator called Rathbone Makes Music, or Rathbone. Yeah, check him out. Hey, welcome to Beer Christianity. My name's John T.
I'm Laura.
And I'm Malka. Melky may not actually be with us.
What? I thought he was in the room.
Yeah, it's very similar to it, but apparently no. No, Melky hates Palestine and so refuses to participate in this.
Yeah.
That is not the case.
Showing his true colors.
Showing his true colors. We were talking about how we could maybe call this episode like fluffy bunnies and rainbows and unicorns, and then just lure people in and then go, ha ha! Joke's on you, motherfucker! It's all about Gaza. Stone
Cold Bummer.
But instead, we thought we would just actually be upfront about it and say that there's no way we could in good conscience not do an episode about this. We were actually planning on recording tonight, but it's just been
Hence why Malky isn't here, to be clear.
Yeah, that's why he's not here, because he had other plans. So he apologizes and he sends his love, and he gave us permission to do as many impressions of him as we wanted. So we may do that throughout.
Purple burglar alarm.
Purple burglar alarm. So yeah, this episode is going to be about Gaza. It's going to be about Palestine. It's going to be about Israel. And I think the reason that we want to do this episode is because of the role that the Christian church has played over recent decades, over the last half of the 20th century, really, in really legitimizing the oppression of Palestinian people, of giving a gloss of theological legitimacy to some of the things that the state of Israel does, and at the same time being incredibly anti-Semitic. And I think we just want to state right up front that anti-Semitism is antichrist. It is completely unacceptable. It is of Satan. I mean, I don't know if you use that kind of language, but yeah.
Yeah, and we said it before, I think last time we did this episode, but if you're coming here for anti-Semitism and that rhetoric, we are not your people. This is not for you. Or maybe it is for you, but not for those reasons. This is an opportunity to educate yourself as to why you are wrong. Because,
I was going to tell them to fuck off.
Oh, also that.
I have no interest in even educating anti-Semites, but we are also not, stating it right up front, we are not pro-Israel. And we are very critical of Israel. And I think that's part of the reason I wanted to do this, is because a lot of the church out there. Here's the thing that I saw, Laura. I saw Toby Mac, who I like, ex of DC Talk, decent Christian talk. He posted twice yesterday. He usually does like the most anodyne affirmations, hard to disagree with Bible verses, and, you know, like little encouragements and motivational poster type stuff, right? And sometimes his lyrics, I can't even remember.
Sure, why not?
Loads of people follow him. He does that kind of thing. He had 2 posts with the Israeli flag. That is to say, the flag of the secular state of Israel, not some kind of representation of the Israelites of the Bible, because these are separate things, different things, and verses about how we should support Israel. And then I went into the comments because I thought somebody's got to be saying, nah, come on, guy, like, this isn't right. And instead, it was just loads and loads of people saying amen and thank you. Yeah. And there is nothing wrong with praying for Israel. There is nothing wrong with mourning people who have been hurt and killed in Israel. There is nothing wrong with ever mourning the deaths of non-combatants and civilians.
Or wanting those people to not die in the first place.
Absolutely. These things I think are absolutely good and fine and things that are completely in keeping with Christianity. The complete absence of any mention of Palestinians, of their humanity, of the fact that they were already being killed, that huge numbers of civilians were in a place that they could not escape from. And the governments of the West are applauding, and celebrities and media outlets are lining up to say, yes, now they must be punished. The complete absence of any mention of Palestinian Christians.
Yeah, that's mental.
Like being Arab means you do not get to be part of the body of Christ. Because they were talking about, yes, we're praying for God's people. And I took some people on because I like arguing with people on the internet. And I was like, do you mean Palestinian Christians? Do you? Yeah. No answer. So we want to make it clear that not all Christians are like that. That there are significant numbers of Christians who recognize the struggle of the Palestinians for freedom, for human rights, for just not being oppressed. There are significant numbers of Christians who do not just side with Israel no matter what because of a superstitious attachment to, if you bless Israel, then I will bless you. But instead recognize that the people of God are the people who, if you want to be exclusive about it, are the people in Christ, and the Jewish people as well. But definitely ignoring your Christian brothers and sisters, absolutely not. And let's be honest, where we are right now, the people of God is anybody who worships God, and the idea that somebody is less deserving, less worthy of our love and our concern in a war situation because they're not the people of God is the way you get genocides.
Yeah, it's gross.
It's really gross.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to kind of talk about that, and also just a bunch of things that we have seen on social media and in the mainstream media that we've just found distressing and that we would like to argue against. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not sure what I think on this because what I'm seeing on the news and the takes that I'm hearing from our politicians seems pretty reasonable to me, I hope that this will change your mind. Yeah. As we said before, if you're coming here hoping for, Jews, they're the bad people. No, that is not how we roll. Neither do we think that Muslims are bad people. No. Neither do we think that people who want freedom for Palestine from the oppression of Israel are bad people.
No.
There is nothing wrong with any of these things. So, that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. We are not experts. Neither of us is a Palestinian. I did approach a number of Palestinian groups as well as Palestinian solidarity campaigns and charities working in Palestine and charities made up of Palestinian Christians and non-Christians. They're all kind of busy at the moment, but
understandable.
And also, we don't expect as a couple of white Christians to feel like we can speak on behalf of them. And also, I felt kind of awkward about, if you're not a professional in these areas, to descend on people at a time when they must be reeling and so worried about family. I couldn't in good conscience do that. So we are praying for Palestine and for all the people who have loved ones in Gaza. Just having a really tough time. But first of all, let's just get it out of the way. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking water.
What the hell, Laura?
I know. I had a gin and tonic tinny in my house, and I drank it yesterday because I didn't know we were going to be recording.
Yeah, to be fair, we hadn't planned this.
I do have some whiskey behind me. But
we'll see how heavy it gets. Maybe you'll need to drink a little bit later.
Yeah, I'll need one. We'll see. How about you?
I'm drinking a Copperberg cider, and it's cherry flavored, which I've never had before. It's very nice. Very nice.
Don't think it is.
And I have a backup Prosecco that I bought when I went punting on the weekend and didn't drink. So
that's exactly the same as my gin.
Oh,
So
excellent.
when
We
went
bought it for the
punting.
same punting trip.
Yeah.
Well, you're pretty free with the term "we" there, Laura. How much punting did you do?
Well, yeah, you did most of it. I was a passenger princess. That's great.
Love that for you.
Also, as absolute side note,
Hmm.
I have a terrible resting bitch face, and if you look at a lot of the photos that we took when we were punting, I look like I'm having a terrible time.
Were you having a terrible time?
No, I was having a delightful time. It's terrible.
Good to know.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that really struck me about a lot of the media coverage that I've seen, and I'd like to kind of hear your take on the media coverage, because I haven't been watching a lot of the news, but I have been watching a lot of TikTok. But one of the things that I saw was how people are required, before they are even allowed to be interviewed, if they're Palestinian or pro-Palestinian, they are required to denounce Hamas.
What?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's always like,
Oh, as
so,
in like,
do
as
you
in,
denounce?
right, sorry, I
Hamas?
thought you meant like off air.
Oh, no.
That sounds
So the
really
first
Yeah,
question is always, do you denounce Hamas? And when I posted first, when it started happening, and I posted something about on my Insta, my personal Insta, something about years of oppression and, something pro-Palestinian, somebody who I don't know, but might be a listener. And if you're listening, hey, saying this, I have a lot of sympathy with the Palestinian people, but not Hamas, never Hamas. And then a long kind of description of who Hamas are, like I've never looked into it. And my natural first inclination was to say, I don't think it is our place as white Westerners who are not under the yoke of oppression to dictate to resistance movements what their methods of resistance should be. And you can ask me personally, do I condone violence? Me condoning it doesn't mean anything, but I think on balance, I would prefer not. I think I'm 90% pacifist. But I also think I've never been in the position where for 75 years, my people have been repeatedly displaced, brutalized, victimized. There was a beautiful thing that, a Palestinian ambassador on one of the mainstream media channels said, where he said the history seems to begin when Israelis are hurt, or when Israelis are killed. That's when we say, oh, this was an unprovoked attack. Oh, this was the start of it. Hamas went in and killed a whole bunch of civilians, and that's what started this. Ignoring 75 years of brutality, ignoring in 2023 the number of Palestinian children who have been killed by the Israeli military forces that you didn't hear about on the news, I'm betting. Because I think the number is close to 40 children, and you didn't hear about it. Now, immediately, a Zionist, and by Zionist, I don't mean some conspiracy of Jews who want to control the world, because I'm not a moron.
No.
A Zionist is somebody who believes in the philosophy of Zionism, which is primarily secular, but now also religious philosophy, ideology that says that there should be an ethno-state specifically and primarily for Jewish people in the Holy Land, which naturally excludes people who are not Jewish, which is racist. And some Zionist is going to come and say, oh, so you're justifying the murder of innocent civilians. And no, I'm not. But what I'm saying is, when you call an attack unprovoked, what do you mean? Or is it just a way of saying, these guys bad, these guys good? And the question that I want to ask people is, when you were posting pictures and videos of brave Zelensky and those brave Ukrainians fighting Russia, where was your pacifism?
Yeah, because I think I'm someone who has probably has been in kind of this conversation for far less time than you have, Jonty, and it's only really been the last few years and kind of stuff on the podcast really that's kind of brought me into the conversation. And I think it's exactly that, in terms of like it makes the news when Hamas does something, and then we forget about it in the in-between times. And I think that's what's really important, is that because the media forget about it, because us in the West forget about it, because it's not in front of us all the time, we forget that this has been going on for 70 years. And, you talk about the Ukraine comparison and, the celebration of the Ukrainian defense forces and, in that, situation. If that had been going on for 70 years, you would still be celebrating Ukraine presumably in that situation. Like that's what we're dealing with here. It is not just a surprise, unprovoked attack from a terrorist group. This is not the same as, a terrorist attack in the UK or, or 9/11 or whatever. This is a provoked attack in the middle of a situation that has been going on for 70 years.
They attacked civilians, which I don't think is acceptable.
No.
I think that's a war crime. It has to be said that it is also a war crime to starve a civilian population, which is something that the Israeli authorities have said they are going to do. They're going to cut off food, electricity, and water from Gaza.
And they are also not letting people out. There has been no way through in creating a humanitarian corridor of letting people free. All border exits are closed. You cannot get out through Egypt. There is potentially, I think, some aid getting through from Egypt. That is it. That's all of it.
And honestly, the most sickening thing, it's all sickening. It's sickening to see civilians being murdered and kidnapped. It is sickening to see Palestinians being murdered and brutalized and injured and having their homes destroyed with nowhere to go. But the most sickening thing for me, and just in terms of its cynicism, was Prime Minister of Israel saying, you better get out because we're coming for you and we're not going to show any restraint. Gaza is completely hemmed in by Israeli security measures. They do not allow people to come in or out easily. There is one exit that they control, and there is one exit through Egypt, and Egypt is not a particular friend of the Palestinians. There's a weird, it's not anti-Semitism and it's not quite Islamophobia, but there is a racist, religious bigotry
I think
position.
the Egyptian line is very much like it's weird. It's weirdly kind of almost pro-Palestinian, weirdly, the line they give in terms of we don't want to, essentially they're saying we don't want to let Palestinians out because we don't want to deny them the right to their own, we don't want to let them lose the right to their own land. Which is a bizarre way of thinking of it. And also they're kind of saying, well, we're not going to get involved into mediating. Any mediating must be done in their own soil. But again,
keeping in mind
300,000 people displaced.
300,000 people displaced. But also for me, the argument that I've seen made online is, well, where are the rich Muslim nations to help them? As if all Muslims are the same. As if all Muslims believe the same thing, like each other. It's like saying, well, why aren't the Catholics helping the Protestants in Northern Ireland? Or the other way around.
If you are going to go down that, why aren't the other nations, helping them? As if Israel is not also targeting those nations,
Indeed.
Attacks today. This is which we're recording on the 12th of October. Attacks today on Syrian airports in Aleppo and Damascus. Just absolutely, you cannot use those airports because Israel has attacked them.
This is what they do: is they bomb specifically. Again, when we're talking about civilians being attacked, when we're talking about war crimes, it seems that the news and the history starts when Hamas does it, but when Israel bombs specific infrastructure needed for life, which under the Geneva Convention is a war crime, everyone is silent about it. And our British opposition party was asked again and again today, the supposed opposition, the toothless the party formerly known as Labour, that still calls itself Labour but has nothing to do with
Conservatives.
Labour. The New Conservatives,
which they also call themselves, by the way,
who said that they that yes, it was completely acceptable to starve a civilian population. This is the level that the rhetoric has got to. Joe Biden quoted a completely unsubstantiated claim that 40 babies had been beheaded by Hamas. Why? Because they know that if you put this kind of garbage out, people's first impression will be, that's horrific, that's barbaric, these people are savages. You know what? Whatever happens to them is fine. And the retraction is always smaller. And even if you hear the retraction, you still have that visceral response to this is what these people do. And other horrible claims that have not been substantiated. Enough horrible has been done by Hamas. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've got these ridiculous claims being parroted by the leader of the free world, supposedly, who bragged, who was terribly proud and gloaty about the fact that he wasn't urging restraint. But some mealy-mouthed, it should be done within the bounds of international law, while ignoring the fact that they have actually said they're going to break international law.
Yeah.
And again, ignoring decades and decades and decades of breaking international law. By annexation, by allowing settlers to come into land that is not theirs. These are all against international law. And it's just appalling. Oh, and then these people come on and they're like, why don't the Muslims help them? As if Egypt hasn't been under a military dictatorship for the last how many years that came in after people voted for an Islamist party. As if Gaza wasn't further isolated and blockaded by the EU, by Britain, by America, and lost a whole bunch of aid when they voted for Hamas. Because we like democracy. We like to call Israel the only democracy in the Middle East. Except if people vote for parties we don't like. Then we will punish them and we will say we're punishing them. I find the whole thing just so unbelievably depressing.
Yeah. It's just, I think watching the news today, it's just been, there's however many 300,000 reserve soldiers ready to go whenever Israel needed. If they go into Gaza on foot, how many people do you think will die? Do you think they are going to be discriminate about who they are killing if they're killing them by rocket or killing them by hand?
Israeli officials have already said that they are not going to be, what was the word?
They're not going to be... No man will be left alive from Hamas is what they have said. But are they going to... Do we trust them to draw that distinction?
The rhetoric being used where they were calling these people are animals and not people. We've heard this rhetoric before.
Human animals.
I've seen a number of Jewish creators on TikTok saying, we recognize genocidal language when we hear it, and that's what this is. Yeah. This is preparing people for that. It's trying to get you into a state where it's like those subtle things you hear on some, not all, but some of the news broadcasts where they'll say, and this has been happening, I think maybe because a light has been shone on it now, they're doing it less, but definitely seen examples of it over the last few days where they'll say Palestinians were killed. And
no, other way around. Palestinians have died.
Palestinians have died. Israelis have been killed. Like Palestinians dying, that's just a thing. And you know how you know that that's a thing that we're all guilty of accepting, is that can you name the people? Do you remember? And I know it's not as big a thing, so there is an excuse because it doesn't all happen at once, and we like big noticeable things. That's why we don't fight climate change as hard as we fight a war against a specific enemy. But the fact that we've just allowed all these people to be brutalized, journalists in the course of reporting being murdered. Listener, how much did you know about that happening over the last few years? Because it's happened a lot, right? And it wasn't Hamas doing it. Do I think Hamas are good guys? I actually have a lot of beef with Hamas because I'm not crazy about theocrats, Do I think that an oppressed people get to choose their own way of liberation? Yes. Do I also recognize that for decades, Palestinians have tried peaceful means and have been oppressed anyway? I saw a beautiful thing where somebody said, yeah, if only Hamas had waited because, Israel was about to give them all their land and their rights back, and then they attacked. No, obviously that wasn't going to happen. And the expectation is just carry on taking it. Carry on taking being second or third class citizens, if you are citizens at all. Carry on taking a military occupation in your country. Carry on taking a situation where the vast majority of people in Gaza are refugees or internally displaced people from Israel-Palestine who were forced in there by active clearances, by terror against them. Carry on just taking that while Israel allows people who were not born there to come and become citizens whenever they want if they're Jewish.
Mm.
If you're a Palestinian who was born there, you do not have a right of return.
Yeah.
As somebody who grew up under apartheid, and I say under, I was a white person under apartheid. I saw the very easy side of it. But I do know what apartheid looks like, and that's what that is. They have roads that only Jewish people can drive on. I have been through the checkpoints that only Palestinians, Arabs have to go through. But if you're white European or if you're Jewish, you don't have to go through them. You can pass around them. You don't have to stand in queue like cattle. It's an intolerable situation. There are a huge number of Palestinian children in adult Israeli jails. What do you think is happening there? How is this acceptable? So we mourn for the Israelis who were killed. We mourn for the people who may not have actively participated in the oppression of Palestinian people. And we wish that it hadn't come to this. But let's not call the attacks unprovoked. We can call them horrible. We can call them inhumane. We can call them war crimes. We can call them terrorism if you like. But the Palestinian people are being terrorized right now. The use of bombarding of a civilian population who cannot leave, that horrific thing of leave if you want, knowing that they can't, that's terror. That is saying, we are going to frighten you into a different way of behaving politically. And when they have tried to be peaceful, it has been crushed. People who have advocated heavily and been successful in advocating for peaceful resistance, is it the first or the second Intifada? One of them, which was peaceful, they were banished. They were exiled because it's bad. Nobody in Israel wants a reasonable Hamas, because then they don't have the boogeyman who they can use as the excuse for these terrible policies. The fact that boycott, divest, sanctions, the BDS movement, right, which is peaceful resistance. This is peaceful resistance. This is what it looks like. Asking people to boycott Israel, asking people to disinvest from Israeli companies or settler companies, and imposing sanctions, that has been banned in several places, made illegal, and the conservative government in this country wants it to be made illegal. The fact that somebody was arrested for wearing a Palestinian flag in Manchester today, not for committing an act of violence, for wearing a Palestinian flag. And I believe Suella Braverman wants to make it illegal to stand with Palestine.
What?
Yeah. This is, I mean, I don't know if that's actually true, but one commentator was talking about it. I don't know what she actually said. They may be over-exaggerating it. But the fact that BDS, a peaceful form of resistance, is being vilified, is being made illegal and impossible, because it's definitely banned on some university campuses. I believe the Labour Party says that it's anti-Semitic. So, yeah.
Quite likely. I think, should we chat about some of the anti-Semitism stuff? Because that's something that I've seen around and I think it's important to note that since the Hamas attacks on Saturday, so on the 7th, I think, there has been, I think, quadruple rise in anti-Semitic attacks in the UK, which is horrendous.
It's appalling.
It's absolutely appalling. Like, this is not, and this is very upsetting, and it is not. This is not. It's never the time for anti-Semitism, but like it's
never acceptable. And the idea that you would see a Jewish person in the street and you would hold them accountable for the nation of Israel. Let's be clear, that is anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
If you have a Jewish friend and you make them answerable for the crimes of Israel, that's anti-Semitic. That's not okay. Hassling or bullying school children because they're Jewish.
Yeah, and
doing it in the name of the Palestinians.
Yeah, and
is wildly
there's
unhelpful.
something about Jewish schools in London telling the children not to wear their blazers because they're worried about them being harassed. Like, that's awful. Like, and that
Completely
is horrendous.
unacceptable.
And I think we need to be really careful about. I think what we need to be careful of is the muddying of the waters between what is and isn't anti-Semitic at this point, because you're seeing people saying that this is the Hamas attacks are the worst anti-Semitic attack since the Holocaust, which it is a horrendous attack, and as we have said, is horrendous, and it should not have been. We should not be targeting civilians at all. Is it anti-Semitic?
I don't think there's any way of knowing. It's anti-Israel for sure.
It's anti-Israel,
and the problem is identifying all Jewish people with the state of Israel is a tactic that the state of Israel uses. And it's completely unacceptable. Yeah. And the idea and also the acts of wearing a Palestinian flag or taking down. I mean, there was a thing in Sheffield of some people climbing up the town hall, I think, taking down the Israeli flag that had been flying and replacing it with a Palestinian flag. That's not anti-Semitic.
That's not anti-Semitic.
That is a political statement about a nation state. It is not. It is not. Again, I think the problem is, I'm sure there are anti-Semites in Hamas. I think there's a lot of anti-Semites in Hamas. I think there's plenty anti-Semites in the Palestinian, population, as there are in the Anglo-Saxon population. Sure. Anti-Semitism is a cancer in most societies. It's weird how people didn't care as much about anti-Semitism when, Ukraine was their big buddy. It's really weird, but okay, that's fine. I think when you make people answerable because of their race or religion for the atrocities of a minority of people who may have something in common with them, that is wrong, that is stupid, and it is exactly what happens to every Palestinian when they get asked a question by the media after Hamas does something.
Yeah.
It's okay, but do you
condemn?
Do you condemn?
Yeah.
And the number of Palestinians have been like, why do you keep on asking me this? Yeah. People who are not the question you should be asking. People from the PLO, from the Palestinian Authority, who are literally the opposition to Hamas.
Yeah.
who are being made to say that as if it's some kind of purity test, which if you did it to Jewish people would be rightly considered anti-Semitic. Any Jewish people comes on, but do you condemn Israel? Well, can I have a more nuanced position than that?
Literally.
What I've seen really interestingly is from a lot of BLM voices, particularly in the States, but around the world, who've been saying this is resistance to a settler colonial project. And what did you think it looked like? Some of them are saying, did you think this was going to be done with a change.org petition? Did you think a strongly worded letter to the Telegraph was going to do it? Do you know anything about resistance to colonial oppression? What I love is Americans who are like, how dare you guys? You literally fought a war, guys. You fought a war against a colonial power. Now, a lot of the stuff that people have been saying I found really annoying is people who when Ukraine happened did not go, we want peace. Peace, peace, peace. When Ukraine started happening, they said, we want victory for Ukraine. Solidarity with Ukraine. We hope they win. Fight, fight, fight. You've suddenly discovered pacifism because now it's Palestinians who are the ones who are in the firing line. So they care less. It's more about peace. Peace doesn't matter. Just peace, 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 peace. No justice, just peace. And people who are saying, listen, I don't think we should talk about this stuff because it's very nuanced and it's very complicated. Is it? Is it? And
I think as somebody who has come into this, who probably had that position at one point, because I didn't, understand what it was. And, I don't understand the complexities of it. I have not extensively researched the history of Israel-Palestine. I do not know the ins and outs of the conflict over the last 70 years. What I can see and what I have seen is, a very easy and simple thing to look at is look at the map of the way that Israel has occupied Palestinian territories since 1947. That is, Google it. It's the first thing there. That's what you can see in front of your eyes of how that has happened. I don't know the ins and outs of the Palestinian history. I can see with my eyes that Israel has occupied this land and that this is an act of resistance. That's kind of all the nuance you need really to kind of have a stance on it.
Palestinian land keeps on shrinking. Yes. Palestinian land keeps on being cut away by walls of separation, by illegal settlements that when settlers move on to Palestinian land, not only does Israel not full-throatedly condemn it, even if they do half-heartedly, but they also send soldiers to protect those settlers. Settlers who are often terrorizing and beating and murdering and breaking down houses of Palestinian people. And it passes without comment, except on page 29 of a broadsheet newspaper.
And that's not to say that you should not become more educated on this, that we should all not become, and like this is the thing, is, to have a position on this does not mean that you need to have all of the facts. You can have some of the basic facts and make a
I mean, you don't need all the facts because then they're gonna.
You should have some facts.
It is impossible
but you do not
to have all the facts on any situation because there are an infinite number of facts that you can take.
Exactly, and we should still be listening to Palestinian voices. We should still be learning and constantly learning and researching and knowing about this.
Yeah.
But you do not need to have done extensive research. You should do some research, but you don't need to know all of the things about it.
And
you're shaking your head at me.
Well, I'm just imagining the people who are going to listen to this and go, that's a ridiculous thing. They actually came up and said the quiet part loud that you don't need to do extensive research. You don't need to know more because they're afraid of the facts. To put it into context, do you have an opinion on the civil rights movement in the US? And how detailed is your understanding of the Jim Crow racial segregation laws? How detailed is your understanding of slavery and its history and the history of its very slow abolition and the back and forth of rights granted to emancipated enslaved people? Do you know all of that? How detailed is your knowledge? Because I think you can have a view. You can have a view on apartheid South Africa and know that it was wrong. You can have a view on a whole bunch of terrible things that have happened in history and pick a side. It's okay. Colonialism generally. However, I think there are two areas of nuance that I think is worth actually introducing. And this is not a reason to not talk about stuff and to not engage with things. But I think there's two areas of nuance. One is to do with the idea that Israel is a settler colonial project. I think it is perfectly legitimate to call that, but I think there is a legitimate counterpoint as well. So the idea that Israel is a settler colonial project is saying when Israel was set up in 1948, and from 1917, Balfour Declaration, when Jewish people were encouraged or were making a move to resettle in the Holy Land after what was then Palestine, the British Palestinian Mandate, I think, which they had gained from the Ottoman Empire. And so we're doing what Britain does and just carving up the world and deciding things on behalf of indigenous people. And there was this ideology called Zionism, which was hotly contested, probably the most contested thing in the history of modern Judaism and Jewish culture, about whether or not it was right to create a secular state of Israel or a religious state of Israel. Loads of religious Jewish people saying absolutely not, this is a terrible idea, and still loads of Orthodox Jewish people saying this is not of God, right? And loads who do. When that was happening, when indigenous people the Palestinians were being removed and Jewish people were coming back to their homeland, you can call that a settler colonial project because those people were coming from Europe and they had been in Europe for hundreds of years. Sure. But the Jewish people originated in the Holy Land. They have just been away for longer. So it is not the same kind of settler colonial project as British people or Dutch people going to Africa or to the Americas or to Asia. It's not quite the same. It's a kind of return, but it's a return hundreds of years later in some cases. And the fact is, people were living there and had been living there for generations. Let's also keep in mind there were Jewish people in the Holy Land who had been there continuously. It's just that they had been oppressed so much there that they had to leave. So I think to call it a settler colonial project is legitimate because you take people who are living there and you bring in people from the outside and you give their land to them. But I also think a counter argument, or there is nuance there about, is it the same? Is it quite the same? And I don't know. And I think it's okay to have nuance there. And the other nuance for me is, if you're fighting oppression, that argument that a lot of the BLM people have been saying is, fighting resistance is bloody. Resistance is not done by letters to the editor. And I don't know how to feel about that as a Christian and as a 90% pacifist. I don't know if I would want to advocate for violence in the face of oppression because of my understanding of Jesus Christ's teachings. But what I do know is that I don't get to judge somebody else who's in that position. As a Christian, I don't get to come heavy-handed and go, well, you're doing it wrong, when I've done very little to help in the situation. And I think Christians, particularly with our role in making sure that the US has given Israel blanket support as they have oppressed the Palestinian people over the years, Christians have been the ones that have been keeping that going. And through very bad theology, I think we need to be very circumspect when we start telling people how to resist, in the same way that white people should not be lecturing black people about how to protest and how to resist white supremacy.
Yeah.
Those are my thoughts. Sorry, I get quite ranty on this subject.
Yeah. We've been going for about 45 minutes. And, I can tell, I think we are both, this is the thing, we are both angry and tired and in bad moods. And we are not Palestinian or anywhere close to this situation. And I just cannot imagine what people must be going through, the people in Gaza, the people with family there, and just thinking about what escalations could happen. This could escalate worse. This could involve a lot of nations like Lebanon, who are already on their knees. And there's it all sucks. And I am glad that, let's be honest, we probably have an audience which mostly agrees with us. This is not a big platform, but I think we both have people that we know who maybe this is something that they would find helpful and educating a bit. I don't know, or maybe it's just ranty. But I hope that it is doing something helpful in some way. Because I wouldn't want to, like we said, this is you said at the beginning, this is a really awful, tragic time for people, Palestinian people, and I wouldn't want to lay an extra emotional burden on someone if we could do that ourselves.
I think it's also worth mentioning Jewish trauma. The fact that Jewish people had been dispersed across the world is because in almost every nation they found themselves in, they have been the targets of oppression. And
horrendously.
And
throughout.
And the worst oppression of, I think, recorded history, or if at least recorded modern history, in the form of the Shoah.
Recorded and not, we're not educated about it at all.
And so I think it's worth keeping that in mind, and keeping in mind that a huge attack on a large number of Jewish people has sent shockwaves through the Jewish community and is incredibly traumatic and brings up all of those feelings. And I have watched with amazement as organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace and Na'amod in, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, in the UK, have held vigils where they have been grieving and shocked and traumatized by what has happened, and have still refused to allow their grief to be weaponized to oppress the Palestinians. There's an incredible amount of really good groups who are doing incredibly good work while facing, I think, incredibly personal psychological challenge in this. And some of them are fully Zionist. They believe in the state of Israel. They believe that there should be an ethno-state for Jewish people because that's how they will feel safe. And yet they are still saying, this is insane what we're doing to Gaza. And some of them are far more critical and are saying the entire project is racist and is apartheid, and we have to dismantle huge amounts of it in order for it to be a just endeavor. And again, the courage it takes to say that, I think, is huge. But let's not take away from the fact that the people who are really suffering right now are Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, who are facing ridiculous military pressure, bombardment, killings. It's just horrendous. And I think if there's anything that I could leave listeners with, it's that beware of the narratives that you're being fed. There's going to be a narrative that says, well, both sides have done wrong. And I would say, look at the history. Look at the historic death toll and injury toll. Look at the death toll and injury toll now. Go to Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is, a Gulf-based news thing, so they're not exactly big fans of Palestinians in any kind of like solidarity kind of way, but they're very good at reporting on the Middle East, especially.
Yeah.
And they're doing regular updates of death and injury tolls in both Israel and Palestine. Look at that. Consider the pressure that Palestinians have been living under for over 70 years. It's not the same. It's not the same. And I would say beware the narrative that says it's too complex to understand. It's not too complex to understand. The fourth biggest military in the world is currently bombarding an open-air prison. It has been called an open-air prison by human rights groups as well as by Israeli officials. That's what it is. And the final narrative, I think you want to be, two final narratives I think you want to be aware of. One is outlandish claims of bizarre violence. Western media is way too willing these days to report pretty much anything being done by enemies of our nation or of our ideologies. See if they've been verified before you believe them and take them to heart. And be wary of the narrative of anti-Semitism as well.
Absolutely.
Jewish people do not have to answer for what the state of Israel does. Jewish people are not part of some global conspiracy to control the media.
No. Obviously.
These things are.
And I think just something that we were talking about before we jumped on air is that actually I think that I have noticed more people becoming aware of the pro-Palestinian narrative, more people calling out mainstream news for this, calling out mainstream politicians for this, and that can only be a good thing. I hope, and keep that momentum going. Do not, don't forget about it in between. I don't think it's going to be something, sadly, says that we're not going to be forgetting about this anytime soon. I don't think this is going away. Keep that fire going and just keep trying to understand. Don't let a fear of getting it wrong stop you from trying to understand the situation, because it is a complex situation, but the bare bones of it are not as complicated as they might seem.
And the more of us speaking out and not being cowed into submission and fear of speaking out, the more that this tide changes.
Yes.
I think.
Absolutely.
When you're in church, and inevitably many of us are going to be in churches where they only say pray for Israel, gently go up to the pastor and ask him or her or them whether they would like to pray for Palestinians. And if it's hard for them to humanize people who they think of as other because they're Muslims and they've got some kind of a ridiculous prejudice thinking that means terrorist, remind them that the vast majority of Christians in the Holy Land are Palestinians. And what about our brothers and sisters? Because we're all for standing in solidarity with them when they're persecuted for their religion. But when they're persecuted for their race, then where are we? Anyway, thanks for listening. I have put together a little playlist on TikTok of all the best videos that I've seen. I've been putting them together for friends who've been asking me just to understand a little bit more of the context.
I've always actually, this is going to be a shameless self-plug, but actually the episode we did with Professor Ilan Pape is a very good place to start if you're kind of beginning to understand about this conflict.
Yeah. So we will link to both of those in the notes for this on beerchristianity.co.uk. If you'd like to, I don't really want to invite engagement on this subject because, but yeah, if you want to message us about anything, you can message us beerchristianity@yahoo.com.
I think even I would prefer people to, at this point, kind of do want to encourage people to get in touch rather than get in touch with Palestinian people to say, well, can you explain what is happening here actually? Like, if you want an explanation,
we're no experts, but we've been engaging with this for
and there's a lot of people with more of emotional load at the moment.
Yeah.
So,
and don't hassle people who are already struggling, but also obviously it is better to hear from people who are experiencing. We don't want to talk about people rather than to them, but it's a tough, complicated thing.
We're doing our best.
We're trying our best here, guys. So we really hope we're not taking up space. We're just trying to be allies here. Yeah. But we'll put links to that, beerchristianity.co.uk. You can find us on Instagram and on Twitter still, and Facebook and all that kind of stuff as well if you want to get in touch. And
if you're anti-Semitic, don't.
Oh yeah, no, go fuck yourself. And also, if you think if you're wildly anti-Islamic, if you think all Muslims are terrorists, if you think that they deserve this somehow, you can also go to hell. I'm not actually interested in engaging with you. If you think that Gaza deserves this, I'm not interested. I don't think you're a person of good faith. I don't think having a conversation with us is going to do anybody any good. So please don't get in touch. It's not just about people who are anti-Semitic. Any racist can go to hell. Anyway, that's a nice positive note to end on.
Hot take.
Pray for Gaza. Pray for justice. If you're going to pray for peace, pray for just peace.
Amen.
And thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye. Purple burglar alarm.
Purple burglar.